Alexander Blackwood adjusted his perfectly tailored tuxedo as he slipped through the back entrance of the Grand Palazzo Hotel. At 20, he had built a tech empire worth billions, but his favorite hobby remained delightfully ordinary: wedding crashing. There was something intoxicating about the raw, unfiltered joy of strangers celebrating love, especially when those strangers had no idea they were hosting one of Forbes' youngest billionaires. Tonight's target was the Henderson Morrison wedding, a lavish affair that had taken over the hotel's entire ballroom. Alexander had done his homework. The bride was a marketing executive, the groom worked in finance, and their combined guest list read like a who's who of Chicago's upper middle class, perfect for blending in. He grabbed a champagne flute from a passing waiter and surveyed the scene. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. The bride, radiant in her flowing gown, danced with her new husband as guests looked on with misty eyes. "Excuse me, but I don't think we've met." Alexander turned to find a woman studying him with curious green eyes. She was stunning, not in the polished, magazine-perfect way he was accustomed to, but with an authentic beauty that made his breath catch. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, and her emerald bridesmaid dress hugged her curves in all the right places. "I'm Alexander," he said, extending his hand with his most charming smile. "Friend of the groom from college." She shook his hand, her grip firm and confident. "Interesting. I'm Sophie, the maid of honor and Emma's college roommate. I thought I knew all of David's college friends." Alexander's pulse quickened. In 3 years of wedding crashing, he'd never been caught so quickly. "Well, we weren't particularly close. More like acquaintances who reconnected through social media." Sophie tilted her head, her smile both amused and skeptical. "Really? Because I just spent 20 minutes talking to David's college roommate, and he mentioned that their friend group was pretty tight-knit. Only 5 guys total." Heat crept up Alexander's neck. This woman was sharp, dangerously so. "Perhaps we should." "Dance," Sophie interrupted, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I'd love to." Before he could protest, she was leading him onto the dance floor. The string quartet had transitioned to a slow waltz, and couples swayed gently around them. Sophie moved with natural grace, and Alexander found himself genuinely enjoying the moment rather than plotting his escape. "So," Sophie said as they danced, "what's your real story? Corporate spy? Wedding photographer having an off night? Or are you just one of those wealthy guys who gets kicks from crashing other people's parties?" Alexander stumbled slightly. "That's quite an imagination you have." "Your watch costs more than most people's cars," Sophie observed, glancing at his Patek Philippe. "Your shoes are handmade, Italian leather, and you have the posture of someone who's spent time in boardrooms. Plus, you're far too comfortable lying to strangers, which suggests you're used to people wanting things from you." The song ended, but neither of them moved apart. Alexander stared into her eyes, feeling something he'd never experienced before: the thrill of being truly seen by someone who had no agenda. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I crash weddings. It's a hobby." The simple question hung between them. Alexander had never articulated the reason, even to himself. Because at weddings, everyone's authentic. There's no pretense, no ulterior motives, just pure joy. Sophie's expression softened. "And you don't get much of that in your regular life?" "Not really. No." She studied his face for a long moment, then smiled, not the polite smile she'd worn earlier, but something warmer and more genuine. "Well, Mr. Wedding Crasher, since you're here, you might as well enjoy the party, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "You owe me the truth. The whole truth. Starting with your real name." Alexander hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. "Alexander Blackwood. And you're absolutely right about the net worth." Sophie's eyes widened slightly, but her smile never wavered. "Well, Alexander Blackwood. This should be interesting." The reception continued around them, but Alexander found himself completely absorbed in conversation with Sophie. They had retreated to a quiet corner table, away from the dancing and revelry, where she peppered him with questions that no one had ever bothered to ask. "So when did you start crashing weddings?" Sophie asked, swirling the champagne in her glass. 3 years ago," Alexander admitted. "Right after my company went public. Suddenly, everyone wanted something from me: investors, employees, family members I hadn't heard from in years. I felt like I was drowning in expectations and obligations." "But why weddings specifically?" Alexander paused, considering his words carefully. This woman had a way of making him want to be completely honest, which was both terrifying and exhilarating. "My parents had a horrible marriage. he said finally. All business arrangements and social climbing. I grew up thinking love was just another transaction. But at weddings, I see something different. I see people choosing each other despite everything, despite the odds, despite their flaws, despite the fact that love is the most illogical investment you can make. Sophie's expression grew thoughtful. And you want that for yourself? I used to think I was incapable of it. My therapist says I have trust issues and emotional walls. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Turns out being a billionaire makes it hard to know if someone loves you or your bank account. Must be lonely. The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. Alexander had built his entire life around the premise that he didn't need anyone, that independence was strength. But sitting here with Sophie, he realized how hollow that philosophy had become. What about you? He asked, deflecting. What's your story? And please don't tell me you're a gold digger who specifically targets wedding crashers. Sophie laughed, a genuine, musical sound that made his chest tighten. I'm a children's librarian. Actually, I make about $40,000 a year, drive a 10-year-old Honda, and my biggest splurge is buying hardcover books instead of waiting for the paperback. A librarian. Alexander couldn't hide his surprise. In his world, he was surrounded by lawyers, executives, and so a children's librarian seemed impossibly wholesome. I know, not very exciting compared to building tech empires. Sophie's tone was light, but Alexander caught a hint of defensiveness. Are you kidding? That sounds amazing. You get to shape young minds, introduce kids to the magic of reading. That's probably more meaningful than anything I've ever done. Sophie studied his face, as if searching for sarcasm. Finding none, she smiled. Most people think it's a dead-end job. My parents certainly do. They keep asking when I'm going to find a real career, or at least marry someone who can provide properly. So you understand family pressure. Different kind. But yeah, they want me to be practical. Find a nice accountant or lawyer. Settle down in the suburbs. Sophie took a sip of champagne. But I like my life. I like my job, my tiny apartment with bookshelves in every room, my independence. No boyfriend. Not currently. Turns out a lot of guys are intimidated by a woman who reads more than they do. She raised an eyebrow. What about you? No girlfriend stashed away in your penthouse? No. Hard to find someone genuine when everyone knows your net worth before they know your middle name. Which is James Alexander? James Blackwood. Nice to properly meet you. Alexander James Blackwood. The way she said his name made something warm unfurl in his chest. They talked for another hour about books, about dreams, about the small moments that make life meaningful. Alexander found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, while Sophie offered glimpses into a life so different from his own. It might as well have been another planet. When the band announced the last dance, Sophie stood and extended her hand. Come on, Mr. Billionaire. Let's give this wedding crasher thing a proper ending. As they swayed to the music, Alexander realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. For the first time in his life, he was falling in love, and she had no idea who he really was beyond what he'd told her tonight. The question was, would she still look at him the same way when she learned the full truth about his world? 3 weeks had passed since the Henderson-Morrison wedding, and Alexander couldn't get Sophie out of his mind. He'd given her his personal number that night, carefully omitting any mention of his last name's significance. They'd been texting daily long conversations about everything from her favorite children's books to his latest business ventures, which he described vaguely as tech consulting. Now, as he sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Blackwood Tower, Alexander stared at his phone, debating whether to call her. He'd been putting off asking her on a proper date, knowing that once he did, the carefully constructed bubble of normalcy they'd created would inevitably burst. His assistant, Margaret, knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Sir, you have the Chicago Tribune on line 1. They want to comment about the hospital donation. Alexander's blood ran cold. Last week, he'd anonymously donated $50 million to Chicago Children's Hospital's new literacy program. The donation was supposed to remain confidential, but somehow the press had connected it to Blackwood Industries. Tell them no comment, he said. But it was too late. Margaret was already handing him the morning edition of the Tribune. And there on the front page was his photograph, alongside the headline. Tech Billionaires, Secret Philanthropy, Revealed. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. AJ, you need to see today's Tribune. There's a guy who looks exactly like you on the front page. Weird coincidence. Right. Alexander's hands shook as he typed back. Can we meet? I need to explain something. Her response came quickly. Sure. Riverside Park Library, where I work. I'm here until 6. The drive to the library felt like the longest 20 minutes of Alexander's life. He'd faced hostile takeovers, congressional hearings, and international business but nothing had prepared him for the prospect of losing Sophie before he'd even really had her. The Riverside Park Library was a small, cozy building tucked between a coffee shop and a used bookstore. Alexander had never been inside a public library before, and he was struck by the warm atmosphere. Children clustered around Sophie as she read from a picture book, her voice animated and engaging. She looked up as he entered, and he saw the exact moment recognition dawned in her eyes. Her smile faltered, and she quickly finished the story before sending the children to their parents. AJ, she said quietly, approaching him with the newspaper in her hand. Or should I say, Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, net worth approximately $3.2 billion. Sophie, I can explain. Can you? Her voice was carefully controlled, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. Because I've been thinking about this all morning, and I can't figure out why someone would lie about something so fundamental. I didn't lie. Exactly. I just omitted details. You told me you worked in tech consulting. You let me talk about my tiny apartment and my modest salary, while you probably spend more on a single dinner than I make in a month? Alexander reached for her hand, but she stepped back. Sophie, please, let me explain why. Why you were slumming it with the common folk. Why you thought it would be fun to play pretend with the poor librarian. It wasn't like that. Alexander's voice was desperate now. Everything I told you about why I crash weddings was true. I was looking for authenticity, for someone who could see me as just a person, not a bank account. So, you lied to find honesty? Do you realize how messed up that is? A group of teenagers had gathered near the young adult section, clearly eavesdropping. Sophie noticed them too, and gestured toward her office. Once they were alone, she turned to face him, arms crossed. I read the article. Alexander, you're one of the most powerful men in Chicago. You have houses in 3 countries. You sit on the boards of major corporations, and you've been linked romantically to actresses and so. All of that is true, but none of it matters when I'm with you, doesn't it? Because I've been thinking about our conversations, and I realize you let me ramble about wanting to expand the children's literacy program, while you could have funded the entire thing with pocket change. Alexander's heart sank. Would you have preferred I wrote a check instead of listening? I would have preferred honesty. Sophie's voice cracked slightly. I shared my dreams with you, my insecurities, my hopes, and the whole time, you were, what? Studying me like some fascinating specimen. I was falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. Sophie's eyes widened, and for a moment, her angry mask slipped. Don't, she whispered. Don't say that. Not like this. 2 months had passed since the confrontation at the library, and Alexander felt like a man wandering through a desert. He'd thrown himself into work with renewed intensity, closing 3 major deals and launching a new artificial intelligence division. But success felt hollow without Sophie to share it with. He'd tried reaching out flowers, texts, even a handwritten letter, but she'd made it clear she needed space. The worst part was that he understood. He'd built their entire relationship on a foundation of half-truths, and now they were both paying the price. Sir, you have the Riverside Park Library Foundation online too, Margaret announced, interrupting his brooding. Alexander's pulse quickened. Put them through. Mr. Blackwood, this is Janet Morrison, director of the foundation. I'm calling about your proposal for the Literacy Center expansion. The proposal, Alexander had submitted it 6 weeks ago, offering to fund a complete renovation and expansion of the library's children's section. He'd told himself it was purely philanthropic, but the truth was more complicated. Yes, we're very interested in moving forward, he said. Wonderful. We'd like to schedule a site visit next week. Our head librarian will be conducting the tour. I believe you may know her. Sophie Chun. Alexander's throat tightened. Actually, I think it might be better if someone else. Oh, but she specifically requested to handle this project. She's quite passionate about it. After the call ended, Alexander stared out his office window at the Chicago skyline. Sophie wanted to see him. The question was, why? The following Tuesday, Alexander arrived at the library wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, the most casual outfit he'd worn to a business meeting in years. Sophie was waiting in the main reading area, dressed professionally in a navy blazer and skirt. She looked beautiful and utterly composed, which somehow made everything worse. Mr. Blackwood, she said formally, extending her hand for a businesslike handshake. Thank you for coming. The Mr. Blackwood felt like a slap, but Alexander forced himself to match her professional tone. "Ms. Chun, I'm excited to see what you have planned." She led him through the library, explaining the current limitations and her vision for expansion. Her passion was evident as she described reading nooks for different age groups, a digital learning center, and expanded programming space. The children's literacy program has grown by 300% in the past 2 years, she explained, showing him a cramped storage room currently housing overflow books. "We're turning away families because we simply don't have the space." "What's your budget projection for the full renovation?" Alexander asked. $2.5 million would cover everything on our wish list, but we'd be grateful for any contribution. Alexander nodded, making notes on his tablet. "And the timeline? Construction could begin in 6 months if funding is secured." They completed the tour in professional silence, but Alexander could feel the tension crackling between them. Finally, as they returned to the main desk, he couldn't hold back anymore. "Sophie, can we please talk? Not about the library, about us?" She glanced around, noting the curious looks from patrons and staff. "There is no us, Alexander. There's a billionaire philanthropist and a librarian discussing a business proposal. That's not fair, isn't it?" She faced him directly for the first time that day. "You had 2 months to figure out how to be honest with me. Instead, you tried to buy your way back into my good graces. The library funding has nothing to do with everything you do has to do with your money. Alexander, that's what you don't understand. You can't separate yourself from your wealth because it's not just what you have, it's who you are." Her words hit him like a physical blow. "So what? I should apologize for being successful. You should apologize for lying to me, for making me fall for someone who doesn't really exist." The admission that she'd fallen for him too gave Alexander a flicker of hope. "He does exist. The man you met at that wedding, that's the real me. No, that was you playing a role. The real you owns buildings and companies and probably has people who make decisions about which charity cases are worthy of your attention." Alexander's temper flared. "You're being incredibly unfair. I made a mistake by not telling you everything up front, but I never pretended to be someone I wasn't. My feelings for you were completely genuine. Were they? Or did you just enjoy the novelty of a woman who wasn't impressed by your bank account?" The question hung between them, and Alexander realized he didn't have a good answer. Had he been drawn to Sophie's authenticity, or had he simply been intrigued by the challenge she represented? "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe both?" For the first time that day, Sophie's professional mask slipped, revealing the hurt underneath. "At least you're being honest now." Alexander approved the library funding the next day, but he insisted on complete anonymity. The last thing he wanted was for Sophie to think he was trying to manipulate her through philanthropy. Instead, he channeled his energy into something he'd never done before. He started seeing Dr. Elena Vasquez, a therapist who specialized in working with high-net-worth individuals. During their sessions, she pushed him to examine his motivations and patterns in relationships. "Tell me about the wedding crashing," Dr. Vasquez said during their 4th session. "What were you really looking for?" "I told you, authenticity, real emotions, genuine connections. But you were observing these connections, not participating in them. You were a spectator to other people's joy." Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I suppose. And with Sophie, what made her different? She saw through me immediately. She didn't care about my money or status. She was interested in who I was as a person." "But did you give her the opportunity to know who you are as a person? The complete person, including your wealth and responsibilities?" The question haunted Alexander for weeks. He began to realize that he'd created a false dichotomy as if his wealth and his authentic self were mutually exclusive. The truth was more complex. His success was part of who he was, shaped by his drive, intelligence, and yes, his emotional walls. Meanwhile, Sophie was struggling with her own realizations. The library renovation had begun, funded by an anonymous donor, and she knew exactly who was behind it. Despite her anger, she found herself thinking about Alexander, constantly not the billionaire, but the man who had listened to her dreams with genuine interest, who had made her laugh, who had looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. Her best friend, Emma the bride from the wedding, where they'd met, finally confronted her about it, over coffee. "You're miserable," Emma said bluntly. "You've been miserable for 3 months?" "I'm fine," Sophie lied. "You're in love with him." Sophie's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. "I'm in love with an illusion. The real Alexander Blackwood is someone I never even met." "Is he? Because from what you've told me, he was pretty honest about everything else. His family issues, his loneliness, His reasons for crashing weddings, the only thing he lied about was his net worth. That's not a small thing. Emma, no, it's not. But maybe you're not angry because he lied. Maybe you're angry because finding out the truth scared you. Sophie stared at her friend. What's that supposed to mean? Come on, Soph. You've always been afraid of being seen as a gold. Your parents constantly criticized your choices, said you needed to find someone who could provide. When Alexander turned out to be wealthy, it probably felt like validation of every criticism you'd ever received. The observation hit too close to home. Sophie had spent her entire adult life proving she could be independent, that she didn't need anyone to take care of her. Dating a billionaire would feel like admitting defeat. So what if it did? Sophie said defensively. So you're punishing him for triggering your own insecurities. And you're punishing yourself by walking away from someone who made you happy. That night, Sophie found herself standing outside the newly renovated children's section of the library. The construction had been completed that week, and the result was even more beautiful than she'd imagined. Reading nooks with soft lighting, a digital learning center with state-of-the-art equipment, and wall-to-wall bookshelves filled with new titles. There was a small plaque near the entrance. In honor of every child who finds magic in books. Sophie knew that Alexander had written those words. She also knew that he'd kept his promise to remain anonymous, never seeking credit or recognition for his gift. This wasn't about buying his way back into her good graces. This was about supporting something she cared about, regardless of whether it benefited him. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to miss him, not the fantasy version she'd created in her mind, but the real man, flawed, wealthy, complicated, and surprisingly vulnerable. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she'd been running from her feelings rather than protecting herself from deception. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Alexander was in his office late on a Friday evening, reviewing quarterly reports, when Margaret knocked on his door. Sir, there's a young woman here to see you. She says, it's personal. Alexander's heart stopped. Send her in. Sophie entered wearing jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked nervous but determined, and Alexander had never been happier to see anyone in his life. Hi, she said simply. Hi. Alexander stood, unsure whether to approach her or maintain his distance. I wasn't expecting you. I know. I probably should have called, but I was afraid I'd lose my nerve. Sophie glanced around his office, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art. This is impressive. It's just an office. No, it's not. It's a reflection of what you've built, what you've accomplished. I was wrong to dismiss that. Alexander moved closer, hope blooming in his chest. Sophie, let me finish, please. She took a deep breath. I've spent the last 3 months being angry at you for lying, but I've realized I was really angry at myself for caring about you, despite your wealth. You don't have to. Yes, I do, because I need you to understand why I reacted the way I did. Sophie's voice grew stronger. My whole life, I've been told that my choices aren't practical, that I should find someone who can take care of me. I've worked hard to prove I don't need anyone's money to be happy. When I found out who you really were, it felt like admitting that everyone was right, that I couldn't be content with my simple life. Alexander's throat tightened. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know, just like I know you funded the library renovation. Sophie, I can explain. You don't need to. I know it wasn't about trying to win me back. You did it because you care about literacy, about kids having access to books. The plaque gave you away in honor of every child who finds magic in books. That's something you said to me that night, about why you thought my job was amazing? Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. You remembered? I remember everything about that night, including the fact that you were more real with me than anyone had ever been before. Sophie stepped closer. I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling like everyone wanted something from you. I realized I did the same thing. I wanted you to be someone you weren't. I wanted you to be broke enough that I could feel safe loving you. And now? Sophie's eyes met his. Now I realize that your money is just one part of who you are. It doesn't define you any more than my job defines me. What defines you is how you choose to use your advantages funding literacy programs, supporting causes you believe in, looking for authentic connections, even when it would be easier to stay isolated. Alexander reached for her hands, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. I'm sorry, I wasn't honest from the beginning. I was so used to people changing around me once they knew about my wealth that I wanted to just be normal. But you're right, this is who I am. All of it. And I'm sorry I couldn't handle the truth when you tried to tell me. I let my own fears and insecurities get in the way of something beautiful. Does this mean you'll give us another chance? Sophie smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in months. "I'd like that, but I have some conditions." "Anything?" "First, complete honesty from now on. No more omissions, no more half-truths. Done. Second, we take this slow. I need time to navigate what it means to date someone whose watch costs more than my annual salary." Alexander laughed. "I can work with that. And third, Sophie's smile turned mischievous. "You have to promise me we'll crash at least one more wedding together. I want to see this hobby of yours in action." Alexander pulled her into his arms, his heart full for the first time in months. "Now that sounds like the perfect second date." As they kissed, Alexander realized that his days of being a spectator to other people's happiness were over. He'd found something better than observing love. He'd found the courage to live it. The most important life lesson: true love requires the courage to be completely authentic, not just the parts of ourselves we think are acceptable, but our whole selves, including our flaws, our advantages, and our vulnerabilities. Alexander learned that hiding behind partial truths, even with good intentions, prevents genuine connection. Sophie learned that love means accepting someone entirely, not just the aspects that feel safe or convenient. The deeper lesson is that we often sabotage our own happiness by trying to control how others perceive us, whether by hiding our advantages or by running from situations that challenge our self. Real intimacy requires the willingness to be seen completely, trusted completely, and loved not despite our complexities, but because of them. Sometimes the greatest risk we can take is allowing someone to love us exactly as we are: messy, complicated, and wholly human.